and that is the need. And your slide, Mike, about the yin and the yang. Yes, that you need to have clear enough strategy, but you also need to be adaptive. And Dan, that came through in some of the points that you were making, that you need to actually give folks a chance to be reasonable and be clear. And the one thing that seemed to shout at me was the need for intent. The need to be really clear around purpose, the reason we're here, the reason we're doing this. You were saying the new chief exec, that was one of the first things that you said, this is our intent of being clear around that. So I want to invite you both to sort of comment on that. And if you could, my role is to try and get very, very practical and very, very, what would you say a customer experience leader could do back in their business? So that's the frame, Mike, that's the frame, Dan. I'm going to ask you to sort of respond to the question. Getting that intent sounds critical, a real cornerstone for both the yin and the yang part of what you were describing, Mike. So what is it that a customer experience leader can do to be able to distill that intent, to actually arrive at that intent if he or she feels that it's lacking in the context of their B2B role? How do you get that clear in an organization? What's your experience?
Well, I love the example Dan gave with that balance. It was the perfect one, you know, with the cricket in Scotland. It makes common sense, right? Yeah. But I'll speak to a lot of organizations, if that happened, would struggle to be able to respond as quickly as that, you know. So it's having that, if the team understands, and this is threaded throughout the whole talk, if this team understands that the why, the purpose, a lot of it does come back to that. They can do that, and then they're trusted in order to be able to do that. Now, you mentioned prior, and I'm going to draw the parallel to the example you gave, Dan, around bringing employees along with you, with the change journey when software is put on. That's a big challenge, and it's getting them to adopt that. One of the practical things that managers in charge of those teams can start to do is start to paint, we call it a picture of potential, right? So start to paint a picture of the potential of your team. How does your team work? Let's create our Emerald City. I used the example earlier on. Let's create it. Let's actually physically get some people in a room. Let's draw some people. What does it look like? How do we work together? What is right? What is wrong? And throw around scenarios like that, because what you're starting to do is you're getting one buy-in to a particular way of working with those two teams, but also you're starting to get them to think about scenarios that may happen. It's exactly the same as Nelson did with his captains around the table having dinner. They would envisage what this could be, envisage that potential. Now, you might need to take those different, but that's a really simple thing that we can do, and that leaders can do to help to get to that purpose. But if you don't have or that picture of potential, but if you don't have that why, if you don't have that core thing that everyone believes in, so that they've got something to argue for and against the decisions that you make, then it becomes very, very difficult. And particularly if they're not seeing decisions made within the organization that align with it. I see so many companies that have these things put up on the wall, values, behaviors, purposes. And to be honest, excuse my French, but they mean jack shit. They mean nothing to that organization. You can observe that organization for 3 or 4 days and realize that what's on the wall happened in a workshop and isn't actually the true culture that lives within there. It's not the true beliefs and attitudes. Okay. So it's about bringing that to the fore.
So an envisioning session, a practical step that you can take to help align the team. Dan, back to you in terms of the challenge here. What is it that a B2B CX leader can do to help try and distill or crystallize that purpose, that intent? Are there approaches, tools, things that you could suggest folks might do to arrive at that?
Yeah, I love some of the points that Mike made. I think that's right. You know, for some, that, you know, the mission statement, whether you love them or hate them, they sit there on the wall and that's the end of it. I think from a CX leadership standpoint, it's about being really clear on where are you in that journey, in my view. And then what are the gaps, and what can you actually do as a leader in this function to either influence the board if you don't feel they're on the journey anyway, or really connect what is the commercial value of the work of customer experience and customer leadership teams to the board priorities. I kind of see two types of customers. I see the ones where this is a board level priority. They all absolutely get it. They're invested in customer experience. They want to invest in it. They know it's going to differentiate them and it's crucial given the competition. And then I see the ones where it's sort of a lower level down priority. They might do bits and bobs, but not really going to make a breakthrough. So I think depending on where you are in that, those two things, the actions will be different. But just to get real practical, I think it's about elevating up out of the weeds and the tactics into really what is the business value of this thing, and then how does it contribute to the purpose, the mission, the direction, or the goals of the company, and just being a lot clearer with what that link is. Because I also read quite an interesting report from Gartner, and one of the biggest reasons CEOs don't invest in CX type initiatives and roles is they don't see the value, which is really pretty basic and obvious. But if you can't bring all of that together to be clear on the value, then obviously you're not going to see that success. So elevating up out of the tactics into what the strategy is, and then where there isn't a purpose or a very clear mission, build the case for one. Ask those big questions. What really are you there to do, and what really do your customers want? And I would say keep chipping away at it.
I think there's something you mentioned there, Dan. Sorry to jump in, David, but I have a bit of an issue with a lot of organizations when we talk about value, and there's a lot spoken about it now, but we tend to always come back to the commercial value, right? We come back to the share price, to the targets hit. There's got to be, I think there's a responsibility and a growing movement in the world to think beyond that responsibility for organizations at the moment. It's got, the value cannot just be in commercial terms. It has to be value to all our stakeholders, be that within the organization, the employee, the shareholders, but the community and the world and the planet beyond. And I know this starts to get for some people into that fuzzy, airy fairy space. But the reality is, and I think a big challenge that a lot of customer experience teams have, is they have to justify every time their plan, their strategy, to a commercial return on that strategy that's being put forward. IT managers have exactly the same problem, because of the way in which they've been placed historically within an organization. We need to be making sure that the values that are being communicated are beyond just the commercial and speak to a wider purpose. And often that needs to be pushed. We need to be pushing from down below to the board and the powers that be to say, yes, it's not going to make money, but it's going to do this. It's going to make this change, as much as they should be pushing it down to us.
Well, it's the way you start.
My high horse.
Yeah, and it's the way you start, though, because if you're waiting for this to come down from the mountain in sort of tablets. I want to go back to your point, Dan, in terms of how you crystallize an intent. I won't embarrass her, but you've got the chief customer officer in one of your companies in Microsoft. I was talking to her on Friday of last week. This is before the Labor Day weekend here, so you could apologise. I understand that somebody was a bit distracted, but they were very, very honest. She and her two colleagues. And I said, do you have an intent in your business? And she said, well, each of the functions in the business feel like they're separate businesses. We're part of the sales team, and no, there isn't an intent. I said, well, why don't you start in sales? Why don't you actually make, this is what we believe, and this is echoing the point that Mike made, this is what we believe is our intent. We're going to use it as the design construct as we start to build new experiences and measure things. And then we're going to invite other functions to stress test it. So we'll actually build our view of intent. I think, Mike, this goes back to your point around envisioning as a group. Yeah, get this group to crystallize their vision. She said, that's a bloody brilliant idea. Well, back for Labor Day, that's what we're going to do. We've been emailing each other since the team got back. So even if you are buried somewhere in the business, if you say, this is This is my view of the intent, colleagues. How does it feel for you? Is it right for you? And then invite other teams to use it, to stress test it, to bring it back. If it's not right, it's out of whack. And you're building consensus. And you get to a point where senior leaders do have to acknowledge, actually, that's pretty useful. And you know, the one thing, and this may be helpful or unhelpful, if you're being clear about intent, it actually requires, especially senior leaders, but folks in the organization, to leave some bits behind. So we are this and this, not this. We are this and this, not this. Yeah. So being clear around intent actually requires you to be also diligent around what we're not. And that's what United have found powerful. Yeah, we are this. Efficiency and so on is effective, but it's subordinate to that. Yeah. So in terms of getting that intent clear and clean and valuable and common, any additional thoughts or comments on getting the intent clear? I want to talk about being adaptive, but any other points on getting clear on your intent before we move to adaption?
Yeah, it's a superb question, David. So I think for us, we've got 110,000 employees, and actually, how do you get all of them in the same headspace around what it is we're trying to achieve and what each business is trying to do across businesses that are very different. We have a consumer business focused on exports. We've got LinkedIn. We have a lot of different sub businesses. So how do you drive consistency across all of those? But I think on the intent. I think for me, my role at CX kind of leadership level is really about creating the culture in which people can innovate within a framework where they're thinking about the customers at the very heart of what they do. So our role isn't to put in place so many rules and procedures that people feel suffocated and that they can't come up with great ideas, they can't create their own plans and visions for their part of the company. But it really is to operate and drive some consistency across the board across that piece. And how we do that, in the spirit of answering your question, is we're using things like rolling training out across the company around mission, around really how we look at each role and each family and each business, and just trying to make sure that we're clear and that we're constantly reiterating what it is that we're trying to achieve. And our belief is the more we do that, the more people will then think about their role within that and what does great innovation and experience look like, and hopefully a culture around them where they're encouraged to come up with ideas that actually help them fix that. And I would say, in the spirit of sort of intent, one of the other things that we've invested quite heavily in is changing the whole way that we compensate our employees. So moving away from our own financial measures, and to Mike's point, there are a lot of broader measures than just the top line revenue and profitability, to look at three areas. So every employee at Microsoft, regardless of where they sit, is basically measured on how their own individual achievements and accomplishments, their contribution to the success of other people, and how they take other people's ideas and initiatives and build upon them and improve them. And it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but what that's actually done is really driven people to work together and partner. And where that happens, and they're able to come up with a joint intent, we see a lot more success than having 110,000 people all trying to do their own thing and very little connection. So I think some of the underlying HR type investments are also key here.
I think there's some lovely examples around the world at the moment of taking what you're doing. I love what you're doing there at Microsoft, and I'm a big Microsoft fanboy at the moment. But there are examples where they've gone even to the extreme of that, where they've got organizations. Let me use Buurtzorg. I don't know if you've heard of Buurtzorg, the Dutch. Yeah. So the way in which they manage they don't manage their teams. No one has a boss, right? They've just got small teams of 10 to 15 people. There's no customer experience there in terms of a department. Yet everyone is customer experience. No one has salary told to them. They decide their own salaries. I mean, it is a completely self-managed ecosystem, which allows for, firstly, the whole person to turn up at work. Right, you can bring everything that you want to bring to the work. It also allows for anyone to be able to sort of make a decision on the fly without feeling like they're being held to it. It's a phenomenal way of working. I mean, it's the extreme, right? It's the Ken Wilber's teal type organization. But if you can work towards that is a great place to be. And that's a whole different talk. I'm not going to go too far down there, but I like what Microsoft's trying to do. I think it can go. There's a potential to go even further, even in large organizations. I think they're 10, 12,000 now. So
there's one behavior though. So for customer experience leaders that listen into this, you put your finger on it, Dan. One of the things that I find really distinguishes exceptional and successful customer experience leaders is their ability and instinctive readiness to build on other people's ideas. So if you're in a meeting, you tend to find it's folks in broadcast mode, and rarely are you listening. So the two behaviors, one is to actually show that you're listening. So is what you said, Frida, that? So that's incredibly powerful in terms of helping somebody to add to their point and embellish their point. And if you say, let me build, and not just say building on your point and then go somewhere else, but actually building on someone's point, that's an incredibly potent behavior for customer experience leaders in B2B, B2C, any sense. It's powerful as a personal behavior to build and to amplify. I want to, I've looked at the questions. I'm not seeing any questions from our audience. I want to just move into the sort of the other point around helping the organisation to be adaptive. And I want to go back to your point, Mike, a while ago around, again, looking for practical things that folks can use. You said about getting folks together and inviting them to envision what the future would look like. I want to sort of poke a sharp stick at how we can help folks to be adaptive. Yeah. And are there some practical techniques and approaches and tools that folks could use to help them and their B2B teams to be adaptive? So are there some things that you found work in the B2B context where you can sort of coach, encourage B2B leaders to do both of those pieces? And I'm thinking of that being really front of mind of folks at the moment, because Labor Day finishing over here, the very, very next thing that folks do is go into their planning mode. So they're going to be looking to lock everything down, Mike, right at the moment in terms of their plans, and the adaptive sort of mindset is going to be left well behind. So it's particularly important to sort of encourage folks to keep that need to be adaptive in mind, especially now. So how do you suggest B2B leaders can encourage an adaptive mindset? What's your practical suggestions there?
Cool. Well, I think the question is the right one. And I think it's not just saying the word adaptive; it's adaptive mindset. Because just to frame something there, I think there does tend to be confusion sometimes around adaptability and agility within an organization and the difference between the two. So adaptability is the mindset that needs to exist for agility to be able to work within the organization. Agility being able to move and make different decisions. I think agility cannot exist without adaptability, but adaptability can exist without agility. All right. So there's two points there, because I've completely confused everyone now. So adaptability, we need to work on the mindset. Agility, we need to work on the structure. So that speaks a bit to what Dan was saying in terms of the systems that they put in place to allow the adaptability to thrive. In terms of getting people to be adaptive, it's as we said, it's the play, the purpose, and the potential. Practically, that picture potential, one of the best things you can do. The other thing is then creating the environment for play. And if you can do that, you're going to actually enable a bit of the agility as well as the adaptability mindset. So some practical things you can do. What needs to exist for play to thrive? First, a system or structure within the organization that moves away from that hierarchy that Dan spoke about to get the decision-making down to the closest person possible. So you need to adjust your structure to that. That is a big change, but it's important to do. And teams can do that outside. Be, like you say, be brave, be the team that does it. Even the rest of the organization wants to work like an old hierarchy. Create your team in a bit of a startup style mode. Give them that agile way of working. And there's plenty of programs and things they can do to learn more about agile and different things there. The other thing, and the key thing, and it speaks to the meeting that you were just talking about, where someone comes up with an idea and you get the bombastic person that just doesn't listen, is there has to be a vulnerability. You have to start to work on vulnerability within your team. Why? Because vulnerability is the starting point for individuals to be able to accept other people and bring other people on board. You'll start to move away. You'll start to create more trusting teams in that way, because people have been vulnerable with what they are. It opens up. And when you're doing that as well, there's an acceptance of failure, because when you move to this more adaptable, agile way of working, you are going to fail. No doubt about it. You're going to mess up. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things which are wrong. And if you haven't started to work on that area in terms of the mindset, then you're going to have problems. So practically, you need to start looking at programs around increasing vulnerability, looking at the adjustments that need to be made to create more of a learning culture that I would say embraces failure, doesn't celebrate failure. No one celebrates failure. It sucks to fail, right? I've never failed in my life and then gone, woohoo, I've learned something. It doesn't happen, right? It sucks. But you need to be able to have a culture that embraces it. There's a great book actually to read around that. First step, here's your practical first step. Go read Black Box Thinking, which talks about the airline industry compared to the medical industry and how they deal with failure and learning in a culture. And it's full of practical things and great advice in there. So as a first step, they can go and do that now, straight after this thing. Go read that book. And that would be a great step to start moving to a more adaptive, agile way of working.
Cool. And you were saying earlier about the sort of the darkness behind me. You can see dawn breaking both metaphorically and physically to my left here. So Dan, stick with that theme. You mentioned earlier on around some of the things that you're doing. I love some of the examples that you're encouraging folks to sort of share. These are examples of people being adaptive. It's okay to be adaptive. It's okay to be challenging. Are there some sort of practical things that you could suggest B2B leaders might do in terms of encouraging that adaptive approach?
Yeah, and I love a lot of the things Mike just shared. I align to all of that. I think for us, it starts again with the culture. So we invest quite heavily, and Mike mentioned the book Black Box Thinking, which I love, but we focus quite heavily on a growth mindset and how do we really help our leaders, managers, and employees to adopt a mindset that says, I can learn new things. I don't know it all. I can embrace new things. I might not have all of the answers. And I think as part of the culture, just allowing people to fail. And one of the subtle things that we've done as a company is that when we lose a customer, we used to not really learn from it, if I'm quite honest. And we used to have these things called win reviews, where we shared, why did we win? What was it why did the customer decide to choose Microsoft as opposed to someone else? We didn't do that for the loss, for when we lost the customer. So, and it was really interesting getting under the skin. It's a lot harder to talk about a loss than it is a win for a lot of people. So just unpicking some of that cultural fear for really challenging, what does it mean to be adaptive? Why do we need to do it? And just being a bit more open and transparent. But we think all of that is kind of rooted in having a growth mindset, being open to learn new things, both from, competitors, but also other industries that might be totally different to ours, but have found a better way to do it, and creating a culture where different ideas, diverse perspectives, other thoughts are welcome as part of the decision-making process. And that's even more important now as we think about, some of the emerging technologies, AI, machine learning, how are we going to coexist with these things? It is really all about, I think, adaptability. And then I think the only other thing I would share is that, the last 6 months have been incredibly challenging, but I think for a lot of businesses, it has taught them that they can adapt and often a lot faster than they really envisioned. We see probably about 10 years worth of digital transformation progress for a lot of our big accounts happened in the space of 3 or 4 months. So it has taught people that we can move forward with these things. And the one example I love, and I'm probably giving a few too many Microsoft examples, but we have a really great operations center in Dublin, and they're processing billions of dollars of transactions. And we had always thought we would never be able to run that thing remotely. Customers needed to sign with a pen on a piece of paper. For a company like Microsoft, that it was crazy that we had that process. But through the last 6 months, we've kind of thought, do we really need to do this? Can we find another way? Do we have to always do what we've always done, and can we move forward? So I think just challenging some of the decision making and being bold is probably the final thing.
So don't hold back on the practical examples, Dan. They're really useful for folks. I want to invite you each to make a final point. And to thank you both again on behalf of the customer experience world and on behalf of the folks that will be listening into this. I especially want to thank Mike for his cosplay earlier. It's the high point of my week. But whilst you're reflecting on your final point, each of you, I want to sort of make a couple of quick points. The thing that you said, Dan, about the 10 years worth of digital transformation in the last 4 months, folks are really feeling that. And I was fortunate enough to be invited to join the leadership team of one of the large banks over here. And the COO said, it's just amazing that we've been able to continue to trade in all of our businesses since March. It's just bloody incredible. People are working from home, branches have opened and shut again. And he said, where we are is because of the goodwill of our colleagues and our customers. But where we are is absolutely not sustainable. So we need to have a root and branch look at all that we're doing to make sure that we are set up for success, and some of these enabling tools, approaches and so on are in place to ensure that we'll continue to flourish and succeed, because the damn thing's coming back in the autumn, and there's probably going to be other viruses as we've actually sort of created the means by which these viruses can enter our ecosystems. It's not going to be the only one. So the ability to be able to be adaptive and to be able to build that resilience into an organization is critical for everybody, not just B2B, but everybody. There have been some really powerful points made on that today. But B2B leaders of any shape, size, hue, function need to understand that we are where we are at the moment. It's not sustainable, and we need to build in that resilience. Second point I'd make is that in terms of where do you start as a customer experience leader, by your own behavior. We've discussed a bit of that. By inspiring and aligning and your own team. There's some incredible things. If your team starts to exhibit this behavior, it's infectious. And I love the point that was made earlier. I forget which of you said this, about actually saying, and this is how I feel. Another banking example over here, but a Brit who leads a Canadian bank, had an all hands meeting. And the first thing he said is, everyone must be really scared. I'm scared. And I'm scared in this way. And he showed that vulnerability right up front. And honestly, I had tears in my bloody eyes listening to this guy speaking and sharing this stuff. And that bank's been absolutely pounding it, in terms of making progress in recent months. That point around actually sharing, it's okay to feel like we do, and to admit to that helps and gives permissions for folks. What you can do as a team, we've mentioned mapping. I only want to mention it because Maggie's asked, can we share some tools and approaches? So I've sent to Amanda a mapping tool that we built a couple of years ago. It's something that the consultants used to use in mapping workshops. We've just made it available for everybody for free. It's a Microsoft Excel macro, so one of your products. And if you enable macro as you open the thing, it's a mapping tool. What we've done is we've actually tweaked it so that it can be used in a COVID context. So you can build yourself a customer journey map and then look at the high risk touch points from a COVID point of view and the high frequency touch points from a COVID point of view, and actually help to zero in on those high risk areas, and it'll help to sort of focus the business on tackling those both from a customer journey point of view and from an employee journey point of view. So you'll get 2 mapping tools for the price of one, but they're particularly useful at this time, the mapping approach. So David Hicks, david.hicks@tribecx.com, ping me an email. I'll be happy to chat more about this offline, but getting 2 guys as articulate and as experienced onto a call was a real treat. So in terms of their final thoughts, imagine the essence, the distillation, the pure expertise you're now going to hear in these last 2 statements. Let me invite you first, Mike, and then you, Dan, to distill your thoughts and your recommendations to customer experience B2B leaders in a few sentences. What's your recommendations, Mike?
Okay, so let's recognize, as you said, we're still in very challenging times, and it's still very scary for people. And yes, there have been faster adaptation to things because of what's gone on than there has been in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, as Dan alluded to. And we've spoken about adaptability, we've spoken about all those things. But if, as leaders within your teams, within your organizations, if you cannot inspire hope, if you cannot paint, get people directed to some sort of light in those grey clouds, the journey is going to be very, very hard. Creating hope is not about being overly optimistic about everything that's going on. Hope is born from despair. Hope comes from often the deepest, darkest places. So I would say to everyone, start there. Find that place of hope to move forward in whatever that changes you want to do, and to make sure that this is not just something that everyone listens to. Write down something that you're going to do from this talk, either something that Dan's inspired you, something David said, or something I've maybe said, that you can actually practically go away and try. Otherwise, this just becomes another conference that you've attended and you don't do anything.
So take one thing and do it. Thanks. Dan?
Super. Thanks, Mike. That was very inspiring. I think for me, really, it's all about growing into the space. I think that this, the role and this discipline is really going to give you at this point in time. I think our roles are critical right now for how companies support their customers, society more broadly, and of course their employees. So just using that as a platform to really go and drive and achieve. We've touched on it a few times, but empathy, really making sure that we're listening to customers, that we're listening to our employees, that we're understanding the unique context and the fact that some people might be loving home working, for example, others it might be their worst nightmare. So just trying to connect at an individual level and demonstrate empathy. And then just really recognizing our roles as managers, leaders, and CX professionals to really model the right behaviors. Particularly at a time as challenging as it is right now, making time to coach and help other people develop and learn, contributing to their success as well as looking after them. And finally, I think the only one that we haven't spent too much time on today, but really being kind to yourself. I don't know a single CX person or leader that hasn't had a hard 6 months, as the companies have had to look to evolve and transform and do things in a different way. So also just making sure that you're giving yourself time for reflection, recovery, and relaxation as well, I think is going to be important because, as we've kind of alluded to, who knows what the future holds, but I don't think it's going to get easier anytime soon in the short term.
Great point.
I want to try and pull those 2 sets of points together. You mentioned empathy, Dan. So in a B2B context, I think it was, you said earlier that Microsoft has actually started to place emphasis on understanding how customers drive value from your products. And that shows real empathy. And working with a large B2B player, very, very big sort of B2B type products. The guy who's the experience lead, he said, I spent all my time on phone calls with our sales folks, ringing every single one of our large B2B customers, asking that question, how is it that you're using our products and our services and automated procedures in the new normal, and understanding what it is that we can do to help you to get more value from that. And when I spoke to Dave, I mean, saying, so that means you switched off the sales force, they're not actually out there selling. He said that our chief executive said, our role from March is to not sell anything. Our role from March is to understand how our customers are driving value from our products and services and to help them to do that more. And we've had our best couple of quarters since March when we focus people on that. Isn't that incredible? So I think there's something there about empathy. And it's interesting, the CXPA board met 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the one thing that surfaced from their conversation was the whole focus of customer experience leaders is to try and get deliberate around building empathy in the organization. That intriguing. So the whole sort of focus of experience is an outcome of the organization having end-to-end empathy, which I thought was quite interesting as an emerging trend. So my thanks both. My thanks Maggie and Amanda for setting up the session. I hope this travels wide, and the two of you, my sincere thanks again on behalf of the B2B leaders that will be taking your practical tips and suggestions. I'm hoping that we have the chance again to present to folks, and I'll be forewarned. I'll come well prepared with my own costume to add to the free songs our presentation. So we should make a promise to do Customer Experience World next year in the B2B context in costume. I'm up for that if you two guys are. So
100%. My world.
All the best.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.